Shadows in the courtroom. The air inside the Seoul Central District Court felt colder than the winter wind outside. Ji-ae Young sat in the second row, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. She hadn't slept. She hadn't eaten. The only thing keeping her upright was a faint hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be the day Cha Eun-woo's name was cleared. He stood at the defendant's table, his tall frame rigid, his gaze forward and unreadable. The light filtering through the high windows caught on the sharp lines of his face. But there was no trace of warmth there, only control. She knew that mask well. What she didn't know was that before this trial was over, her understanding of his case, and of him, would be turned completely inside out. Halfway through the prosecutor's opening arguments, Ji-ae Young felt it, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck, as though someone were staring directly at her. She tried to focus on the lawyer's voice, but it was impossible. The sensation grew stronger, more insistent. Slowly, she turned her head. In the far corner of the courtroom, in the very last row, a man sat perfectly still. His posture was casual, almost lazy, but his gaze was locked entirely on her. He was dressed simply, a black coat, dark jeans, but something about him screamed out of place. His eyes were sharp, assessing, as if he were cataloging every detail about her. Ji-ae Young's stomach tightened. She didn't recognize him. When she looked again a few moments later, he was still watching. Not Eun-woo, not the judge, not the witnesses. Her. As the morning session wore on, Ji-ae Young found herself glancing back repeatedly, almost against her will. Each time, the man's gaze met hers without hesitation. Once, she mouthed silently, "Do I know you?" He smiled. Not a warm smile, but a small, knowing curve of the lips, then looked away for the first time. But it wasn't relief she felt. It was dread. During the lunch recess, Ji-ae Young approached Eun-woo. He was flanked by 2 guards, chains rattling faintly at his wrists. "I need to talk to you," she whispered urgently. "Ji-ae Young, there's someone here, watching me." Back row, corner. For a flicker of a second, his expression changed. Barely, but enough for her to notice. "Don't look for him," he said quickly. "And whatever you do, don't talk to him." She grabbed the edge of the table. "Eun-woo, who is he?" His voice dropped lower. "If I tell you, you won't be able to walk out of this building the same way you came in." When the trial resumed, the stranger was gone. Ji-ae Young tried to convince herself she'd imagined the intensity of his stare. But as the prosecutor launched into the cross-examination of a witness, she saw movement near the side door. The man slipped in quietly, now standing rather than sitting. He leaned against the wall, arms folded, and watched her again. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the words being spoken. At one point, Eun-woo turned slightly in his seat, just enough for his eyes to meet hers. She could tell by the faint tension in his jaw that he'd noticed. A commotion broke out as a key witness suddenly refused to testify, citing personal safety concerns. The judge called for an early adjournment, his gavel striking like a gunshot in the heavy silence. As people began to file out, Ji-ae Young moved quickly toward the exit, only to find the stranger standing directly in her path. "Ms. Moon," he said smoothly, his voice low and deliberate. She froze. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," he replied. "But you will." Before she could respond, he slipped something into her coat pocket, a folded piece of paper, and walked away. No one else seemed to notice. Ji-ae Young's fingers trembled as she reached for it. On the paper was a single line, written in hurried but precise handwriting. "You're asking the wrong questions about why he's here." Below that was an address. She should have thrown it away. She should have taken it straight to Eun-woo's lawyer. But curiosity, no, instinct, won. That night, she went to the address. It was an old newspaper office, the kind that still had dusty file cabinets and yellowing archives. Inside, the stranger was waiting. "Why are you following me?" she demanded. "Because you're the only one he'll listen to," the man said, his tone calm. "And because you have a right to know the truth before you decide which side you're on." He pulled a file from the cabinet and slid it across the desk toward her. Inside were photographs, grainy surveillance images of Eun-woo, but not from the night of the alleged crime. These were from months earlier. In them, Eun-woo met with people she didn't recognize, men in suits, their faces partially obscured. One of the photos showed an envelope changing hands. "These are doctored," Jae-young said automatically. The stranger shook his head. "These are the ones they didn't show in court. The ones they buried because the truth is far more dangerous than the charge he's facing." "What truth?" she pressed. "That the man he's accused of harming isn't the real target. He's a distraction. The real target was someone much higher, and Eun-woo got in the way. That's why he's here." Jae-young swallowed hard. "Then why not tell the court?" "Because if he does, the people behind this will go after everyone he cares about, including you." Jae-young stared at the file. If what this man was saying was true, then Eun-woo's silence wasn't guilt. It was sacrifice. But believing this meant stepping into the same shadows that had swallowed him whole. "You can walk away," the stranger said quietly. "Pretend you never saw this. Or you can help me. But if you do, you'll have to stop thinking like someone in the audience of his trial. You'll have to think like someone on the inside." The next morning, Jae-young returned to court. Eun-woo looked at her briefly as she took her seat. She gave the smallest nod, just enough for him to know she'd seen something, learned something. And for the first time since his arrest, his expression shifted. Not into a smile, but into something close. Relief. But she also saw something else in his eyes. Warning. As the judge called the court to order, Jae-young glanced toward the corner of the room. The stranger wasn't there. But someone else was, another unfamiliar face, watching her just as intently as he had. And that was when she realized she hadn't stepped into the shadows. The shadows had stepped into her. The air in the courtroom felt even heavier the next morning. The murmurs of journalists and spectators rose like restless bees. Their words blurred into one meaningless hum. Jae-young sat in her usual seat, but she wasn't really there. Every detail from yesterday kept replaying in her head. The stranger's unblinking eyes, the slip of paper with the address, the grainy photographs, and his voice telling her, "You have to stop thinking like someone in the audience." She hadn't told anyone. Not the lawyer. Not Eun-woo. Not even her best friend. Something about the stranger's warning had stuck like a splinter under her skin. The court clerk called the room to order, and Eun-woo was let in. The chains at his wrist clinked quietly, but his steps were steady. Jae-young met his gaze. This time, she didn't flinch. She let him see that something in her had changed. His brow twitched, barely visible to anyone else, but she caught it. A question. A worry. She wanted to tell him, "I'm not as in the dark as I was yesterday." But she also knew that here, in this room, every look was a message someone else could intercept. Midway through the witness examination, movement in the far back corner caught her attention. The stranger was back. He wasn't seated this time. He stood near the exit, his black coat buttoned, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses. He didn't look at her immediately, but when he did, it was only for a second, a small nod, a silent "we're not done." Her heart kicked against her ribs. It wasn't just the fact that he was here again. It was the certainty that if anyone else in this room noticed him, they'd know he didn't belong. When the court adjourned for a brief recess, Jae-young stepped into the hallway, pretending to scroll through her phone. The stranger passed her without breaking stride, but as he did, something brushed against her hand. A folded note. She palmed it instantly and kept walking. In the women's restroom, she locked herself in a stall and opened it. This time, there were only 2 words scrawled in dark ink. When court resumed, Jae-young counted rows until she found seat 314. It was at the far side, near the wall, empty except for a stack of old legal folders on the bench. During a moment when the judge's attention was elsewhere, she slid over casually and reached beneath the wooden seat. Her fingers brushed against something taped to the underside. A flash drive. Her pulse spiked. She slipped it into her pocket, her eyes fixed on the front, as if she were still listening to the cross-examination. But she wasn't as subtle as she thought. When Eun-woo glanced her way again, his gaze flicked, quick, sharp, to her coat pocket. His jaw tensed. He knew. The whisper in passing. At the end of the day's session, Eun-woo was escorted out first. As he passed by her row, the guards paused for a moment to adjust his cuffs. In that heartbeat of stillness, he leaned just close enough to murmur, "Don't plug it in where they can see you." Her breath caught, and then he was gone, swallowed by the door to the holding area. That night, Seoul was drenched in rain. Ji-ae Young sat at her kitchen table, the flash drive lying in the center like a loaded weapon. She almost didn't want to know what was on it. Whatever she found would be something she couldn't unsee. But she plugged it into her laptop anyway. A folder popped up. No labels, just a series of timestamped video files. She clicked the first one. The footage was grainy, black and white, surveillance camera feed. In it, Eun-woo walked into a dimly lit underground garage. He wasn't alone. 3 men approached him, one handing over a thick envelope. Eun-woo opened it, glanced at the contents, and nodded. Her stomach twisted. It looked bad, very bad. But then, in the corner of the frame, she noticed something the camera wasn't meant to capture. A man watching from the shadows, face partially obscured. The same stranger from the courtroom. In the next file, the camera angle shifted to the outside of a building. Eun-woo stood talking to a young woman. Ji-ae Young didn't recognize her, but halfway through the conversation, an unmarked black van pulled up, and 2 masked men tried to grab her. Eun-woo fought them. Hard. It wasn't the scene of a crime. It was a scene of someone stopping one. A sudden knock at her door startled her, so violently she almost pulled the flash drive out. Through the peephole, the stranger. She opened the door a crack. "You can't just keep showing up." "Did you watch the videos?" he asked, rain dripping from his coat. "Enough of them." "Then you know why he's here isn't the whole story. And you know why they can't let him talk." Ji-ae Young's voice was sharp. "Why me? Why not the police?" His lawyer? Someone who can actually help. "Because they're already compromised," he said simply. "And because you still believe him. That's the only leverage we have left." The stranger stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Tomorrow, the prosecutor's going to introduce evidence that makes him look like the mastermind. If that happens without context, the jury's mind will be sealed before the verdict." Ji-ae Young felt the room tilt. "What do you expect me to do?" "Find a way to get that footage in front of the court, without them knowing it came from me." "That's impossible." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "So, is surviving what's coming?" But here we are. After he left, Ji-ae Young sat in the dark, listening to the rain against her window. For the first time since Eun-woo's arrest, she didn't just feel like someone sitting in the gallery, waiting for the outcome. She felt like a player in a game whose rules she didn't understand. But there was one thing she knew now.